Object? Nope. Looks like it started.
Well, I would like to just welcome everybody to the AI and Assessment PLC, and we've got Rick Freudhofer and Tracy Stuckey here to take us through it. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Oh, so this has been a whirlwind over the last, I don't know, it seems like it's ramped up over the last 6 months or so. But it has been a whirlwind with AI and Chat GPT and the gazillion other tools that are out here. So we're happy to lead this discussion. I'll just go to the agenda slide. So first we'll start with kind of like a little bit of an intro to the session, which includes an audience survey, and then an overview of Chat GPT and AI, similar AI tools. Talk a little bit about what we've learned about how instructors or students are using it, some tips and suggestions for use, and then we'd like to have an open brainstorm and conversation about some possible uses for this tool. It's not going away. It's not going away. So we want to talk about how we can be productive around it. So the purpose of the session is really information sharing. Like, we're not experts. We just started exploring this ourselves recently, taking the time to scour the web for news articles and videos and play with some of the tools and things like that. By no means are we experts. So it's really about just sharing information and getting a conversation started. Will be the first of many conversations around these tools and other similar tools that are being developed and launched and used in all kinds of ways that we maybe didn't think about, or some we did think about. So to start out, what we like to do is get a little bit of a survey. I'm gonna put in the chat the polls. I'm going to put all 3 of them in there, make it a little bit easier. So these links, there's a handout in the chat also with lots of readings and videos and things that you can use to continue to advance your knowledge about it. We're asking 3 questions in the poll. They're on the screen, and in the chat are the 3 poll everywhere links. And if you guys will go ahead and answer those, click on those. Let me know if they're not open. I think I opened them though. And I'll get the results up. I'll stop sharing for a second. Okay, I see people are answering. Cool. Let me just put the results over here. All right, and going back to sharing. All right, so can everyone see the responses? So it looks like we have a lot of people out of the, how many people we have here? 7 people who played with this before. And only maybe, I guess there's probably 1 person who hasn't played, but still knows a little bit. Let me move to the next one. All right. And so our next one. Oh, this is really interesting. Can everybody see the results?
No.
No? I shared the wrong thing. Let me try that again. How about now? Yes? Okay. So there are one never used it before, but some people have used it for, okay, so now I'm curious. Of the people who, oh, I'm not supposed to do this. I'll ask it later. We're not supposed to get into make this segment too long, but I'm curious about the specific ways that people have used it. So be ready to share that later. So we have a few people who've actually used it, but no one here has used it for teaching yet. And last one. So teaching related concerns. Okay, so looks like people are worried about integrity issues, so citations, bias, inaccuracy, compromising, promoting cheating, I think is really what this is about. And I see accuracy a lot too, because it's not accurate. It's not accurate in a lot of ways. I saw some weird things happen with ChatGPT when I finally did play with it. So going back to the PowerPoint. So now we have at least a little bit of understanding of your experience with that tool so far. Hopefully we can get into more in the discussion about how your experiences with it as well. So I'm putting PowerPoint. And sharing. Okay, so as I was saying, there's a whole bunch of related tools. Can you see the PowerPoint now again? Checking. Okay, good. There's a whole bunch of related tools. Rick, did you want to talk more about these?
Could you go to the previous slide, please?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I skipped one.
One more.
Oh,
there we
wait,
go.
Wait.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
that's where I
this
want
one,
to be.
Okay. Thanks.
So everyone clearly has some sense of what ChatGPT is. I asked it to give a 5-bullet summary of itself, essentially. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One is I think it's important to understand in a tool like this, the underlying thinking behind of the people that create a tool like this. For example, I noticed that a number of you mentioned the idea of bias. And so what I would like to invite you to do is in the handout that I provided, there's an interview of Sam Altman, who's the founder of OpenAI, done by Lex Friedman, who's a podcaster. He's an AI developer. And if you want to understand, for example, how ChatGPT is looking at the folks, or how OpenAI is looking at bias, listening to that will give you an understanding of how they are trying to do it. And I'll just give you one example of something they mentioned is that, as probably all of you know, ChatGPT is in version 4 right now. And with each iteration, there's a couple of things they do. There's technological enhancements and there's enhancements in the language model that they use. So as you probably know, what a tool like this that uses a large language model is essentially when ChatGPT sort of became known to everyone was, I think, version 3.5. And that version had used data. Essentially, it pulled in information from the web dating back to or up to 2021. Important thing to know, it doesn't take everything. They make decisions about what they take in. It's all textual information. And they also have review boards that look at things like bias. And so, of course, that might beg the question of who's on these review boards and who do they represent? So those are things that Sam Altman talks about in this interview. You know, what they try to do is provide, you know, if you look at their philosophy, they're trying to provide a broadly accessible tool that, for example, things like hate speech. How does it deal with hate speech or people who maybe have hate motives and are looking for information or ways to help them, whatever, with propaganda? And I think it's interesting to understand how it deals with that. It's not clearly it's not a neutral tool, and so as you're thinking about its use at, in your teaching or how your students might use it, that's an important thing to think about. So I'm not going to get into the specific background, since I think all of you have some awareness of that. But if you look at like the last bullet point, it has the potential to revolutionize many industries, including healthcare, finance, education. So clearly the folks behind it think that, that's part of their philosophy. And if you've read any of the stories, people are using it in, across, many industries. So I just wanted to, state that as, just make a few notations and to point out that interview, which I think was, will really give you some powerful insights. And so if you go to the next slide, please. This is just a recent poll to show that students are using it. That's all that, the point that we wanted to make, that students are using it. I know my students have been using it. We'll talk a little bit later about syllabi and assignments and things like that. But you can have some sense of for example, the third bullet point, they do not intend to use or continue using to complete their schoolwork. So that's, I'm not sure, again, this was 1,000 students. I'm not exactly sure how representative it is, just to know that it's being used. And so we just sort of wanted to make that point. And then the next slide are a number of tools that, and just to give you a brief description, again, these are all in the handout. Elicit does literature reviews, essentially. You can ask it research questions. Bard is Google's version. They're a little bit behind in terms of their development, but that's something that they're working on. Microsoft is a heavy investor in OpenAI, and so they are integrating it into their search engine. And then these following things are different plugins, usually Chrome plugins that, for example, you can do a summary of a YouTube video, down to the last one, which is you can have have an interface between ChatGPT, sort of with an animated face. So there's different ways that you can use, and pretty much all of it is using the ChatGPT data set in some form. And so one other thing that I want to notice about the data set is that now ChatGPT-4 can access the internet, meaning it can pull in current information. So if you were to ask it, I haven't done this yet, but if you were to ask it, sort of who won the Academy Award for Best Picture in for 2023, that it should provide an answer for that. So, but here are some tools that some of your students are, I know that some of my students are already using Elicit, for example. So again, because of we don't have a ton of time, wanted to give you sort of a list of things that you can look at. I'll stop there. Are there any questions up to this point?
Rick, when you say your students are using it, can you explain that a little bit? Like, how are they what are they using it for?
So they're using it, for example, for example, you can feed it a piece of text like an article and have it summarize it for you. You know, I know they're using it for that, to do a quick literature review, and so if they have a particular question they want to get a sense of the literature on, they'll use it. I think one of the things that they're learning about is how to refine their searches, and so that's a big aspect of interacting with a tool like this. It's not you ask it a single question. It's a refinement process of like you could ask it, for example, and I don't know if it give a good answer, but how would I summarize this research article to a group of high school teachers? And it would try to make connections between the research findings. And so I think I don't want to say that it's a strength of the tool, but it tries to do that. It will try to do that for you. And so those are just a few of the things. I don't know. I see Sean is here. I know that he's been doing some presentations on it. Are you aware, Sean, of any way that students are using it? And
I don't know specifically, but I will say I've had some success myself for non-academic work, having it just suggest an outline of, here's a topic I want to write a 2-page paper about. What information could I put in an outline, and it'll come up with some stuff that I hadn't thought of that I could then go research, and that kind of thing. So I could see value in that in an academic space. I haven't done it for academic work yet, but I think it could be useful.
thanks. Tracy, do you want me to go over some of these, or I've been talking a lot. You're muted.
It's okay. I talk a lot all the time. So I don't mind, but I can go over some if you want me to. So these are some things that are to consider about the use of these tools. You guys can hear me okay, right?
Yes.
I'm getting a little pop-up over here. So like checking out to see how ChatGPT would respond to your assignments. For example, you have an essay prompt, type it in there and see what ChatGPT will give you. It is good at summarizing, but it can't really generate any new knowledge, and it pulls things from the web. So you have to keep in mind this, we don't know what sources are being used to get those summaries or whatever it is that they're giving you. It might be a good idea to use to see how authentic assessment might, giving your students more real world types of assignments might circumvent students using, because if they have to summarize, then yeah, something like that could do that for them. But if they have to do more applied, authentic types of assessments, then, if that's what you're giving them, then it's less likely that they'll be able to use something like ChatGPT to do it for them. you know, multimedia responses, for example, is another. It can't do that yet. Although I did learn about one AI tool that if you give it it's called Dolly, I think.
Mhm.
You know what I'm talking about, Rick?
Yeah,
If you give
that's
it a,
also an open AI product is Dolly. Yeah.
yes, if you give it a few words, it generates images that are unique for you. So, but that's still not going to, you know, necessarily be what you're looking for, right? When you give them an assignment. So I think just, you know, thinking about how to make things really relevant to your content, what you're doing, and your learning outcomes and so forth are helpful. So incorporating outside sources and having students rely on those, asking them to draw on their responses to each other. One of the things I remember from my formal life when I used to teach in the literacy nightmare fuel. Yeah, he says it not. Yeah, I haven't used that one. I'm scared. I'm scared, Sean. But one of the things that I remember from back in the day was the idea of making connections, students making connections between from text to text, text to self, text to world. I don't know that a chat GPT will be able to do something like that, you know. It's not gonna be able to reproduce that for them. So, you know, that's another way. And then too, like, isn't that what we want? We want students to be doing more higher order types of connection making, thinking, to be demonstrating that, and not simple recall. Most of the time, the things that we want our students to learn, recall, just knowing something and being able to recall it or understanding it, it's just that's just a simple foundation of what we're teaching. We really want to see students apply what we're teaching them and use it in some way, use it to create, you know, use it for some much bigger purpose than just this is what I know. We know that what we know changes anyway. So students learning how to learn and learning how to use information is a better demonstration in many cases of knowledge. And sometimes you do have to of you know, mastery. And sometimes you do have to just know, you know facts, and that's okay too. But at any rate, you know, using the Chat GPT, which we'll talk about later at the end. We'll ask you to brainstorm some ideas for this, but asking the students to actually use Chat GPT to answer a prompt, and then they can respond about that. You know, oh boy, Greg posted some crazy, I don't even what that's going to say in here. These,
Oh, God.
okay, right. I'm like, Lord, we don't know. Oh, that's not even cute at all. Okay. In the style of Monet. I dig though. I see I'm picking up
Yep.
what they putting down, you know. I get it. I get it. But yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to use these tools. And then to also, if you would prefer students not to use them, there are ways to work around. And we like to, hopefully you can think of some ways to use these tools. They're not going anywhere. We're stuck with this stuff in some form. So we, you know, we can try to push for things not to change, but you know, that's not going to happen. Change is inevitable. So I'll let you pick this one up, Rick. I've been talking
Thanks.
now.
A few things to consider. One is around intellectual privacy. And so OpenAI did not ask if, you know, if you publish something on the web, it did not ask you if they could use it as part of their data set. And so it's sort of like a big vacuum that whatever happens to go in it based on their search criteria becomes part of their data set. So that I think would also include your prompts and things that you ask it. And also an important consideration is privacy. For example, if you were to put, like put a student's work in or part of their, into it as part of a search or something like that. Like sometimes I've used Google to see if, to check, a particular thing that a student has written. Their privacy policies aren't, and this goes back to their philosophy. Their philosophy is we're going to release this early and often, and so they, they're iterating, these tools relatively quickly, putting things out there and seeing how people are using them. And so they, in order to do that, they have to have pretty liberal, I guess, or maybe that's not the right word, but even their privacy policy is something that is being it's evolving. And so I just wanted to point out those things. And before we get into our conversation, just to wanted to mention there's a couple of things. OSU's working on policies. I tried to see if I could see where they were in terms of development. I don't know if Mark, if you have any insights in there around OpenAI, for example. I know, I don't know if any universities have outright banned it. Some teachers have, but the policies are evolving clearly. But something, and there's a couple of resources in the handout to consider is how you're going, I think it's important to include some mention of your expectations of its use as part of your syllabus. And so, that's hopefully that's something that we can have as part of our conversation. So we've left sort of the last part open for us to converse. We wanted to give you some some things to, for us to talk about, and then, we'll see what you're all interested in. So good. Now's the time where we're gonna start to try to engage you in conversation. So I'm curious, Mark, what your curiosities and are or experiences are at this point. What questions do you have?
Rick, did you say my name specifically?
I did. Yeah, I mean, there's only 4 of you, so we're gonna, this is the only way we're gonna.
I was like, wait, I thought I heard it, but I was like, oh, wait, is he opening it up more broadly? So, yeah, I'm just here to learn more. I'm like, yeah, I think there's lots of interesting things. One thing that hasn't been brought up is the potential environmental impact of the large language learning models and how much it takes to run when so many people are on them. So yeah, just and that's in the back of my mind, but more sort of how can we be more intentional about it in our teaching so that it doesn't seem like we're just trying to act like it's not there, or that students aren't using it, or
right.
Put in the syllabus like you're not allowed to. Does that make students feel like, okay, well, maybe I should try this if they're telling me not to? So how do we like try to just make it more transparent? Yeah, so just thinking about those things.
Yeah, totally agree. I think both Tracy and I have that philosophy of that. That was sort of the reason why we wanted to engage folks in a conversation. And
I was just thinking about on that point. I think if we share what we know about the inaccuracies of AI in terms of doing research and some of the critiques that you and Tracy had already brought up, which is, that it pulls from everything. So like, whether that you have no idea to know whether that's factual, and really make that part of our conversation about AI, I think students will come to understand that it, that it can present a faulty product. So I think that's an important part. think about.
What that also makes me think about too, and is like how much more important critical media literacy has become over the last 6 months. I mean, like, we've talked about this for a decade or more, probably more. I feel like when I say something is a decade, I'm thinking it's way like not that, no, 20 years, probably 25 years that we've had to deal, we have to say, we censorship, it's not realistic. We have to teach young people and all people to be more critical in their consumption of media. And just it's so important, and this makes it even more important because the way the answers come out it sounds so authoritative. The way it's written is it's like the really nice expository text, and it sounds so like the real thing, and it could be like totally inaccurate or biased and all kinds of other things. So just getting folks to, you can't depend on one source. Again, we've been saying this ever since the advent of the internet, the web came out. You can't just accept, you have to critique, and it's even more true with this.
Debbie, as someone interested in policy and equity, have you thought at all about sort of those three intersections?
So I think that I think it's really hard to put language to it, right? Because we're still in this weird space of all of these iterations of it. I mean, especially with ChatGPT, right? We're on version 4 and it's been like 5 months. And so it's hard, I think, to keep up with where it's at to kind of put any type of legislation on that, even at a university level. I was in a Senate meeting. When was that, Dr. Allen? Like a month ago, last month's meeting. And this was the whole conversation, right? About how do we begin to put any type of policy to this so we're not, saying don't use it, but we're consuming it appropriately, like you were saying, Dr. Stuckey. And so I wonder, I mean, there are positive points, right? Like for English secondary learners on our campus and being able to summarize things like a YouTube video, or I mean, there are pros and cons. So how do we make sure that what we're writing about it, especially from a policy standpoint, captures all of that? And so I think that's the big struggle that I've had in attending a lot of these meetings lately and talking about AI is where do we begin and kind of putting language to that. So, but I mean, I use it. So it's like, I love, Canva wasn't on your list, but I'm a big Canva fan. The thing that I've used lately with Canva is you can create a document, right? Like a handout, and then hit the present button and it turns it automatically into a PowerPoint. So you don't have to do that twice. And so that's a really helpful tool. And it kind of takes what you've written and summarizes it into a really nice and succinct PowerPoint. And it's a lovely use of AI. So yeah, I think there are really great uses for it that are efficient and effective. So how do we find the right appropriate dosage of efficient and effective in conjunction with integrity?
Thank you, Debbie. Is there anything you or Anne have to say about what you're aware of in terms of the university and the mechanisms that are in play?
We had at that Senate meeting, there were a number of people that talked, and one of them came from the university libraries. And I think they're very focused on this, and they're really trying to understand it and make themselves a resource. So I don't think we're at the point that the university has actually articulated a policy or anything around it, but there are people working on it, trying to understand it and trying to become resources for folks at the university. So it was a great discussion. We heard voices from undergraduates and graduates, and we heard voices from staff and faculty. So it was a really great discussion.
Thanks. Greg, besides Dolly, how are you using generative AI?
So I'm over at SEAT and with Sean and Fan was on here and Dr. Correa, and we're all very interested in it. And we just had a presentation about it. So I don't teach per se. I train a lot of people, but I don't teach. But it's just one of those things that is very interesting, probably like most. I heard about it, didn't care much about it, and then I read more about it and I tried it. And I'm like, oh boy, this is something else. This is a big leap. And just got interested in it just in the past 2 months. And then, with Microsoft and like you said, and all that. And Sean and I almost talk about it every day. We have a Teams chat with the 4 of us, and we're just posting. There's so much articles,
Mm,
and I'm just warning people. I think Tracy said it, that it's coming. We're not going to stop it. I know they had that one document they wanted to pause for 6 months. Like, okay, they could pretend to say that that's not going to happen. It's all business. Everyone's Microsoft's so excited to be on the top right now. So, but they're making one called Copilot that's going to be in all the Office products soon,
mhm.
and it's just going to be there, and you're going to start using it. So it's just right now, it's just for me, it's a very interesting thing. Like VR, I just love to explore it and see where we can go with it.
Well,
So, go ahead, Sean.
if I could just add in real quick, I think Copilot is especially interesting because it does, I think, Debbie, you were the one that mentioned that Canva can just create a PowerPoint for you. If Copilot works the way Microsoft says it is, and right now I think their pilot test is like 30 users, right? So it's clearly not ready to roll out. But you can give it a document, you can give it an unrelated an unrelated like PDF, and it will create a PowerPoint with the content from the document and the design from the PDF. And then I think about things like I think Elsevier just changed their publishing ethics document, and so if you submit a publication for any of their journals, you have that uses AI, you have to include a paragraph that says, we used AI. I don't know where you draw the line, so I use AI to check the grammar. My grammar was checked automatically by Microsoft Word. Does that count? It's technically AI, so it's gonna, I think it's so blurry in the future that it will be hard to know that you're even using it, because these tools will be so baked into the products that we're using on a daily basis.
Sean, I love that you said that. Okay, so look, this is the kind of stuff that goes through my head, okay? So I started thinking back to the arguments about the calculators in math classes. Y'all remember back in the day, way back in the day, they didn't like it, and so my thing was, I was a traditionalist when my kids were little in many ways, not in all, but in many. And I was like, I learned my times tables through 12. You should all learn your times tables through 12. Okay, because you need to memorize. What if you have to be in the store and you need to calculate the percent off something? What you're gonna pull out a piece of paper and try to figure it out? So, right. But then calculators became a part of the cell phone, the smartphone that everybody has on them at all times. At all times. This thing has become like my arm. I cannot leave without this thing. All the phone numbers that used to be in my head are now in this thing. The tools that I used to have to use my mind to do, I have tools on here. So it makes me ask the question, do we still, what do we need to be teaching? Do they need to know this stuff? Like, do they need to know how to do this still? Like, what are we preparing? What is the world going to look like that we're preparing them for? My son doesn't need to know his timetables through 12. He has a thingy that he can use, and he not really, I mean, it helps, but only if you don't have your phone. So it's just like, it makes me question, like the world, what is it going to look like in, I don't know, I don't even want to say 10 years, 5 years. Will there be some things that we can free up our minds from, and we'll have other tools that can do that work for us? And what really made me have that thought too was playing around with the tool Elicit. Has anyone used Elicit? Who said yes? Nobody said yes. Oh, Rick, I know you tried it. Did you try it, Debbie? Okay, so I tried it. Can I just show you what I got? This is what I got. I'm going to show you. So literature reviews, everybody, it's a gift and a curse, right? It's like we love them and we hate them. They take forever. So this tool, I went and put in one question. Yes, please try it, Mark, because this blew my mind, and I didn't click on anything yet. I just pulled this up. I typed in the question: what is the relationship between socioeconomic status and early literacy skills development? Which is a common research question. We already know there's lots of stuff out there on this, right? And this is what it did. It gave me all these papers. It gave me a little summary of the abstract, right, for each one. So when you go searching, I remember in grad school searching for them articles and taking forever to try to read all those abstracts and try to write. This just cut down time for me. I don't see this as a bad thing, y'all. I do not. This was a huge time saver. I don't know how accurate the summaries are. Like, I don't know that. So I would need to go back because I don't trust it. I would go back and read the abstracts and see, but at least it's narrowing down for me some literature. Actually, I don't think they're open. I don't know that they're open access. Like, I didn't even try it, but I see, oh, now look at that. I didn't do anything. I'm just sitting here. You see, got new tech. It does weird stuff. So I do see this PDF one right here. So I'm going to click on this and see what it does. Okay, so this one is a public access one, but I don't think they all are. But I'm not sure because I didn't click on anything yet. So we can see that it does give you, some of these have PDFs attached to them. Some of them do not. You can even ask for the ones that have PDFs in case you want to go straight to those. I don't know what it's going to produce, but as you can see, this was a really, when I first saw that, I was like, man, that would have saved me so much time when I was up in the middle of the night back in the day, trying to get all these articles together and feeling overwhelmed. And then the rabbit hole that you go down, you try to search one thing and then you find an article that's loosely related. And the next thing you know, you're not on your topic anymore. I don't know if it happens to anybody else, but it happens to me a lot. But at any rate, it completely, it completely puts an end to the rabbit hole thing, because your articles are all on the topic that you just typed in there. So you don't got the rabbit hole effect anymore.
So that strikes me very similar to what you would do in JSTOR, right? So, however fine your question is or however fine your search is, but what this does is that it's a much broader, scope of, of material. But the summary part concerns me, because I think that's where you need to be critical about what you're reading. And if it's just picking out words, that's, if you're just trying to get a handle on what's out there, that's one thing. If you're trying to do, an annotated bibliography or something, that's concerning, because I think that's where you have to be critical. And I go back to your story, Tracy, and I hope that we never lose those skills. But
I'm very proud of I still know them through 12. I know them.
Yeah,
still.
Good for you.
But I bet my youngest, my oldest probably does, but I bet my youngest doesn't, so, and I remember arguing with one teacher in middle school because she didn't think it was necessary for them to have all this emphasis on grammar, because the grammar check things and I was like, girl, you are killing my soul saying this to me right now. Stop it. So it was a big thing. Like, it was a big thing, just a philosophy difference, and I still don't like that. I think people should know proper grammar. You should know that.
Well, I think that's where it gets really hard, right? Because there's so many different ways to apply the rules. One of the things that I've thought about is thinking about, would these tools be effective in thinking about what makes for a winning proposal, or whether that's a grant proposal or some other kind of proposal. Would it be able to sort of somehow gather up the successful proposals and do some sort of analysis?
That actually would be kind of neat. I bet you something could. There's probably something out there that would do that. I don't
mean,
know.
You might be able to ask it, for example, of
Ask it.
look at successful NSF proposals around a particular topic area and what do they have in common would be I don't know, it'd be an interesting question to ask it to see. You would think those proposals are publicly available. And so yeah.
It in the to that question, and there's in the resource document that we shared, there's a one YouTube video under additional resources, and it's like 30 examples of what generative AI can do. The title is something like that. Check that video out, because I think something similar to that was mentioned in there. It wasn't about grant proposals, but the idea was similar. So it might, give you some ideas. Oh, Lakeisha had this question.
Mhm.
How can we use AI to help measure critical thinking skills? We did not cover that. No, we did not cover that. That's beyond. But how could we? I'm not sure that I'm not sure of the answer to that question. I like to pose it to the group.
Lakeisha, do you have any ideas?
I don't. I know the number one thing people always say is that you can use the tool, but the human experience that adds to AI is that concept of creativity that we have in terms of thinking. That what clearly distinguishes us from AI is that ability to be creative. So I don't know how you can, if that's something that you can incorporate to measure critical thinking skills.
I'm not sure. I do think that there are nuances that humans can deal with that I don't know if a computer or any kind of computerized or AI or anything will ever be able to do. I just can't imagine it. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say that though, because I couldn't imagine this stuff right here we're looking at today. But thinking about some of the things that I've been working on, like evidence-based interventions. Like we can go search WorkWorks Clearinghouse and find evidence-based interventions, but we also need to match those to the context, to the students, to the what is that environment like? Is it a good fit for like all of those kinds of things where you have to really look at things, look at the whole person, the whole being. I don't know that any kind of non-human entity could really do that well. I just don't know. I mean, it can do stuff like it can take some like grunt work off our plates, you know what I mean? But I don't know if it can do that nuanced work where you're looking at context and issues and human experience and all those things.
What I love about Lakeisha's question is it forces us to ask the question of what is critical thinking. We've used words like creativity, subtlety, nuance. Those are all things that if we were all to write down what we meant by those things, it would be vastly different. Emotion. So I think of these as like AI is part of our humanity is the way that I don't make that distinction. It's a mirror. It's a funhouse mirror, certainly, absolutely, and completely. It is not, but the decisions that get made are based on all of our our biases, and things like that. And so I just so I think it asks us to again to re-examine those questions, and I really like that. One of the things I wanted to mention is to introduce a term that I'm sure most of you already know. It's AGI, Artificial Generalized Intelligence. The folks at OpenAI, this was their ultimate goal, and AGI is sort of the holy grail of AI, to have, an AI, solve a problem the way that a human would, maybe indistinguishable. And in this interview, that the Sam Altman interview, they were debating on whether or not GPT-4 is an AGI or not, or, people, if you look up, for example, AGT or ChatGPT-5, but this is something that will become more of the conversation going forward sooner or later. And these bigger questions around creativity and critical thinking, I think, will be even more important to suss out and to articulate.
I like the idea of making that an assignment, though. Thinking about having folks try their very best to create the highest level, GPT document that they can, and then do a critical analysis of that. I would really love to do that assignment.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a teacher on TikTok talking about how she uses ChatGPT in her classroom, and she started the semester by giving it the prompt that she would normally give her students at the end of the semester for the story, and then she went through it and removed the stuff that was blatantly wrong and left blanks, and then gave that to her students to sort of fill in. But then she has this plan to end the semester by giving a different prompt and having the students figure out for themselves what's accurate, what's inaccurate, because especially the longer the response you get from ChatGPT, the more inaccuracies it's likely to have. And I thought that was a really interesting way to, Dr. Trey, it reminded me of your saying, like, taking the heavy lift. Like, that would be a hard assignment to just do on your own and know what to put in that's fake and right and correct and wrong, and having ChatGPT do that, even though that wasn't what you asked it to do, I think is a good way to get the students to kind of think critically about what they know about the material.
I love that. That's a great idea. If you guys do any of these assignments with anyone, y'all let us know how it goes. I love to know how it turns out.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thanks for sharing that, Sean. So we have, I think, just a couple minutes left. Is there any burning or things that you wish we would have talked about? It's so much of a, as some of you mentioned, so much of a fire hose of information, and people are just using it for, millions and millions of people are using it for things like, use it for, for what? I see so many, examples of it that, that's where, like, the creativity, so people are embracing it. And I think one of the things that I am, I'm interested in and trying to think about is clearly for teachers, but also thinking about how, for example, this will change work. Again, I think part of, I think sort of one of the, the philosophies around, the folks that make this stuff is that it will make work easier, but clearly, jobs will change, some jobs will go away. What's the impact of that on education and how we think about education, how we prepare? It makes me think about pipeline issues, and it makes me think about, family literacy and how, because, I saw, for example, Tracy, the literature review that you did, and I've been doing some reading on sort of the impact of family on early, like digital literacy development. And
Mhm.
I think, I think there's so much work for us as a, as a department and as a college to be done, in this area. And I don't tend to, I tend to be like a little bit pessimistic around new technologies and
Me too.
and not, but there's, I feel like there's something like qualitatively there's something very different happening.
Yeah.
That tipping
You
point.
know, I think too, the thing that is, I think probably the biggest, one of the biggest, I'm not gonna say the biggest because we got some big ones. One of the biggest issues, like conundrums facing education, is what in the world are we preparing kids for? Like, and I talk as a parent, I have my young people are, emerging adults. And the world is a very different place from when I was an emergent adult. So I have to set aside my own like orientation and frame of reference a lot and say, okay, wait, I can't necessarily take what I know to be right and say this is right for you when your world is real different from my world. And I don't know what it's going to look like when you're 40. I don't have a clue. Like, there's no clue. So how do we know what we're preparing these kids for, what to teach them, what values to, like, we don't know. We don't know what skills they're going to need. We don't know for sure. We got some guesses. And I think that is what's making our jobs stressful and hard. Talking about new programs. New programs for what? We don't know. So I think we have to rethink what skills are going to be needed, going forward. But it's 12:01. I could probably talk about this for the next hour. I'll stop now.
Thank you so much. This has just been wonderful. And it is really just scratching the surface, and I'm looking forward to hearing much more. But thank you. And thanks for everybody for showing up.
Yes, thank you. And do you
Okay.
have access to the recording? Or should we share that?